censorship. One of the biggest buzzwords I've seen in the visual novel community, especially recently. There's a bunch of different official meanings for the word censorship, but in the visual novel community, generally refers to an original Japanese visual novel that got some content edited or removed for an official English release. I'm going to talk about censorship related to 5 different topics: mosaics and H scenes, removing 18+ content entirely, edited jokes, edited visuals, and rewriting content entirely. First, I'll talk about mosaics and 18+ sex scenes, usually called H scenes, are by far the most common thing we'll see in English releases. Though in a way this technically isn't censorship in the English release, Japan apparently has a law where any pornography at all released there has to have mosaics over genitals. Funnily enough, companies like Manga Gamer and Jast only release visual novels in English that have no mosaics at all. Most English companies that do 18+ releases have no mosaics about half the time, and Shirobune always release their eroge with mosaics. Occasionally, we'll get weird mosaics added to the English release, like Shirobune originally adding white block mosaics in Megasuki, likely due to the main character looking like a younger guy or a Shota. So in a way, any English release without mosaics can be considered an improvement, as long as you don't mind how the genitals look. That said, whenever there are any English releases with mosaics, there are definitely people who will complain they are still retained in the English release and call it censorship. Next, I'll talk about the removal of 18+ content into English versions entirely, with no official patch to add them back in. Some companies that do this with all their releases include Moe Novel, who's released If My Heart Had Wings and A Sky Full of Stars, and Fruit Bat Factory with the first and second releases of The Princess, The Stray Cat, and Matters of the Heart or Noratoto. However, we've had a few companies that generally release 18+ patches officially, but didn't for a specific release or two. For example, Sekai Project did not have an official 18+ patch for Baldur's Sky on Steam, and most recently, Laplacian announced that they wouldn't be having an official 18+ patch for Cyanotype Daydream, when the English versions of Newton and the Apple Tree, Ricky Horny, and Future Radio are all going to have official 18+ English versions. A very odd rare case was the official release of Subahibi, or Wonderful Everyday. There's apparently a bestiality rape scene, but they only removed the CG itself. The writing of the scene was intact. Next, I'll talk about edited jokes, which is a bit rare. There are a few cases where an all-ages version of an eroge will actually have edited jokes, usually to get more of a 16 to 17-year-old rating at most, so that will mean some jokes will be less overtly sexual in nature, if not having the sexual joke entirely rewritten. A prime example of this is in The Fruit of Grisaya, where someone on Reddit actually compiled a comparison of various jokes that got rewritten for the all-ages Steam and Switch version. Next, I'll talk about edited visuals like sprites and CGs, which once again is actually fairly rare. A somewhat recent case was this happening only in the PlayStation 4 version of Doki Doki Literature Club Plus, where there's a scene where a certain character stabs herself, but the gore shows a gray bloodless wound instead of blood spraying out right after the stabbing. This was not edited out in any other version of the visual novel. A minor case where this happens is the Switch and Steam versions of If My Heart Had Wings, where a few girls are talking in a group bath and instead of being naked, they have towels on. One of the most controversial ones in recent times was the official release of Rewrite Plus on Steam with 3 lewd, but not 18+ CGs. This was a unique case, as the original Rewrite visual novel had the lewd CGs there, but just not being that bad. When Japan got the Rewrite Plus version, these 3 CGs got updated and got a little bit more risque, especially in Lucia's. However, in the English release of Rewrite Plus, Sekai Project used the CGs from the original Rewrite release in order to have a higher chance of reaching Steam. Sadly, this last-minute change, at least to the consumers, got some people to complain about changing the CGs and calling it censorship. Next, I'll talk about rewriting content entirely. Oh boy, the biggest one, and one of the main inspirations for this video, was once again Cyanotype Daydream. Announcing no 18+ content patch officially was already one thing, but another thing that stirred up controversy was straight up aging up a heroine and changing a setting in Chapter 1. Minor spoilers, I guess, but basically in the original Japanese version of this visual novel, Chapter 1 contains a story with a 45-year-old male teacher eventually getting into a sexual relationship with a female high school student. In the upcoming English release, they're officially aging up the heroine to actually be in college age, including having a completely new long black dress instead of the typical Japanese high school uniform. According to the blog by the developer and the publisher, these changes were done due to a mix of being worried about Steam banning games for sexually exploiting minors, and the artist believing the changes ultimately don't affect the story that much, and you still get the general meaning, a very immoral relationship. Alright, so I've talked about the main topics people bring up whenever visual novel censorship becomes an issue. So what's my opinion on this? On a personal level, generally I would prefer a way for the reader to have the choice to read the visual novel in the way it was originally developed, but in their preferred translated language. As far as just changing or removing 18 plus content goes, generally people are very willing to make 18 plus fan-made restoration patches if the official publishers aren't willing to do so. This is fine, and shows the dedication the Western eroge scene has, but it is an unfortunate time waster for the fans themselves. I'm something of an H scene connoisseur myself, so I always enjoy at least trying the vanilla H scenes. That said, I am oddly particular on the H scenes I really like, and depending on how the story or 18 plus stuff is written, there are cases where I'd be willing to just read an all ages version if I felt like it. A common theme for every type of change I talked about purely seems for the intent for the English release to get on Steam. Steam is generally considered to be by far the biggest potential market for newer, casual readers, since Steam is by far the biggest overall digital PC game market in the West. However, Steam has an issue with banning games on Steam, likely due to sexual exploitation of minors, and most erotic having clearly high school age females advertised as being 18 years or older. I generally try not to buy visual novels on Steam since I like supporting third-party platforms, and apparently Steam takes 30% of all sales. That said, I can't deny how many people use Steam or refuse to buy visual novels anywhere else due to convenience, regional pricing, among other features. But if a company really wants to make changes to be able to make it on Steam, I don't see why they can't just host an additional non-Steam version elsewhere. Do they think it's too much extra money or effort? Do they care about image or artistic vision a lot? Jask USA is one of the biggest visual novel publishers and is very vocally anti-censorship and is very willing to host any visual novel on their site as long as the company is willing to strike a deal with them. And Jask is always appreciative if they get the uncensored version on their site. I do think caring about stuff like artistic vision can be a nice thing if the author wanted to portray the story in a certain way. However, if they wanted to make big changes just for an English release, I don't see why they didn't just write these important details in the first place for the original version if they cared so much about them. At the end of the day though, regardless of what I personally want for a visual novel, I think the company should focus on what makes them the most money or profit. Despite the visual novel market being relatively niche, it's a safe bet that pure 18 plus eroge fans are very willing to drop money consistently for English releases, and I'm sure having no mosaics is even a big plus for some. On the other hand, there are cases where visual novel companies started full 18 plus, but have since gone full all ages for their releases like Key, Type Moon, Zero Seventh Expansion, and Mage's Games, making some of the most popular visual novels ever like Clannad, Steins Gate, Umineko, and the Tsukihime remake. So if the idea of a company decreasing or eliminating its 18 plus content to reach a wider audience is a long-term goal of theirs, it can be calculated risk. They would just have to write a really good story to get enough consistent buyers to outweigh the potential of the 18 plus protesters. Either way, my wish is that visual novel companies that actually still enjoy making them continue to find a way to do so. Sales and profit ideally lead them to making more future products, so hopefully each find their personal best way to do so. Anyway, that's my hopefully nuanced opinion on this subject. What are your guys' thoughts? Do you think any big changes from the original version to the translation are pure bad censorship? Or do you think certain changes are acceptable, whether it's to make visual novels more accessible or allowing the author to more freely choose how they want to present their story? Feel free to leave a comment below on your opinion.